Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Today, we have an incredible journey to share with you and how you can tune out the noise and find your why. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this podcast episode and would love for you to share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today, it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this podcast interview. Today's guest is Daniel Hodges. Daniel is the president and the co-founder of Pieces of Me Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that he started while he was at law school. Daniel's personal mission is to capitalize on his lived experience and hard-won perspective in order to create a more abundant future for people with disabilities. As a thought leader and in the accessibility and inclusion area, Daniel helps individuals and the organizations embrace the massive opportunities associated with developing a world where everyone truly belongs. Let's welcome Daniel Hodges to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely, I am as well. Daniel, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and your journey to this point?
Absolutely. So I start off by saying I was born blind and also with a connective tissue disorder that took a while to diagnose. I actually didn't get the diagnosis for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome until I was well into my adulthood. And so what that meant is I spent my childhood sort of not quite in the right space. They didn't know what to do regarding educating a kid who couldn't see very well. They didn't know how to provide the right resources or really whether it was worth their investment. So what ended up happening is I ended up trying to leverage what little bit of eyesight I had left, which really wasn't enough to get by or to be functionally literate, up until the point where the school system and others finally decided, well, this isn't really working. Homeschooling's not working. So in the US, grades 7 through 11, which should have been the back half of my educational journey up to my senior year, which would have been 12th grade, that 5-year gap, I actually missed entirely, save for a few lessons here or there. And then I ended up going in for my senior year, 12th grade, at a specialized school for the blind and trying to get caught up there. But by that time, the die was cast in the sense of, we don't really see college in the future. We don't really see much of the way of gainful employment. It was just kind of assumed that by that point, there were, maybe some marginal benefits I could gain or some contributions I could make, but really there wasn't much talk of me going and succeeding.
Mm, mm. And how did that make you feel?
It set up a dualistic mindset in the sense of, on one hand, I was young enough and brash enough to say, wait a minute, I'm not ready to confine myself to those low expectations. But at the same time, it's not like you can take all of that negativity and just be completely immune to it either. So some of it did stick and kind of bury itself in different regions of my brain for me to have to later excise at some other points down the line.
Absolutely. That's what we call the shadow, right? All those repressed
Yep.
feelings that
Yep.
pop up sometime in your future when you're older and have to work through it. And this year, I went through that journey of really sitting with my shadow and working through that. So I can totally appreciate that you would have had a lot going on that would have come up later in life. So Daniel, could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start the Pieces of Me Foundation while you were still in law school?
So I should point out that for me, law school came in my mid-30s. So by that point, there were, multiple battles to get through my undergrad. There was, the birth of three kids, two of whom had cancer and eventually beat cancer, came out all right. There were battles with employment and with healthcare and with having to deal with in the US what they call child protective service, because
Mm,
the hospital was not prepared to listen to how a blind couple could successfully take care of and raise a child. And so, even though we had answers that were valid and ended up being correct, there was a resistance to even learning about our tactics. There was such strong bias that we ended up having to deal with that while we were getting our daughter, our firstborn, treated for cancer.
mm,
Um, so by the time I was in my mid 30s, I was looking for a reason to be able, a way to be able to leverage these things. This is what led me to law school with the hope of practicing at the intersection of healthcare and civil rights. And then by the time I reached the middle of that journey between the first and second year of that
mhm,
summer, I have been challenged by life to even look a little bit beyond that and say, okay, there's so many people falling through the cracks right now,
mm.
and there's so much we can do right now. So that's how Pieces of Me came to be, because my cousin Christy and I just had seen so much happening that I was like, look, yeah, I'm still going to go graduate, but I want to get working on this right now and start helping people right now, which is what we did.
Yeah, wow. So you mentioned your daughter had cancer.
Correct. Yeah,
What
my
what
daughter.
age?
So my daughter and my youngest son were both effectively born with it. So my
Wow,
daughter, we started her treatment within her first 2 weeks of life,
wow.
and yeah, and it was pretty intense. It was a cancer of the eyes. Um, that her mother had also had as an infant. So we knew to look for it. We knew there
Mm,
was a genetic component there, and um, we here we were, first time parents in our early 20s. We had that going on. We had, again, trying to prove ourselves as blind parents going on. We had the fact that I was working 40 hours a week as a stalker for the local retail store.
mm,
So I had to split my nights off in order to go to all the appointments. And yeah, it makes you grow up really quickly. And then when you know that this cancer is fairly aggressive, and you're bound and determined to make sure that they have the best outcome they can, you go back in, you look at the studies, you do all this stuff. And I think what's interesting for your audience in this is, here we were again in our early 20s, and we were doing everything possible, which included sitting down as young parents on multiple occasions and saying, look, we hope we're ahead of the curve, but we're going to sit down and contemplate, very thoughtfully contemplate worst case scenario. So
mm,
we're going to talk about those things that most parents don't want to think about with our baby and say, okay, if this cancer advances, what do we do? Where is that breaking point where we go across the US for more help? Where are those points where treatment options change? How do we, let's do that really, really difficult emotional work right now, so that if something happens, we're not so bound up by grief that we can't strategize.
mm, mm. Wow, that would have been a really tough journey, um, especially in your 20s, and and also your daughter being so young.
Yeah.
Um, I remember in my 20s, I was 25, and my ex-wife and I had a stillborn baby, 7.5 months into the pregnancy, and that was devastating as it was.
Ah,
Yeah, so I can't even imagine what it would have been like for you and your wife or your.
it was tough. And with our youngest one, um his cancer came a couple of months into his childhood. So we had a little bit more time. But with him, we knew what the protocols were.
Mm,
And we were living in a different part of the country at that point where they they had their own strategies that were we knew were leading to suboptimal outcomes for their patients. And so we pushed for better screening, quicker intervention, all
mm,
the things that we knew from the literature were the right things to do, to the point where we actually ended up needing to get referred to a different part of the US.
mm,
And when we went back to try to tie everything together, where we're actually told, oh wait, no, you've actually been banned from ophthalmology and oncology in this major children's hospital because of your advocacy. So like, whatever, okay, yeah, you may not want to acknowledge that we were right, but you
mm,
know, here's where I can say, both for the fact that we did not relent, and for certainly being blessed, because we can only take so much credit for this. Um, we were certainly blessed as well, but in a case where usually when this cancer attacks both eyes, for the baby, it's very common, almost a given, that you're going to end up removing one of the eyes as part of the treatment process. And
mm.
not only did each of our children keep both of their eyes, but in the case of our youngest son, he's just about got fighter pilot vision. So we ended up learning the literature, fought the fight, didn't get dissuaded when we ran into opposition. And yeah, again, we were certainly blessed along the way. We had, um, I would like to say, a lot of divine intervention and making sure they had, the best outcome they could. But again, for us as parents, we had to have the right mindset and we had to stick with it
Mm.
regardless of how difficult it got.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think with your over the years with your advocacy, do you think things have changed now?
Um, Honestly, it's still an uphill battle.
Mm,
We were just actually talking. The kids' mom and I were just talking the other day about how still the outcomes for retinoblastoma in the U.S. are not what they should be, and a lot of it still comes down to right now in 2024. I could make a serious case that doctors are so afraid of blindness as an outcome that they're making treatments or advising treatment decisions, such as trying to continue to treat an eye that has almost no use or almost no hope of usable vision. They're prioritizing that over making sure that first and foremost that child stays alive.
yeah.
So I look at it and say, okay, right, this cancer should not have the mortality rate that it does. And the reason it does is because they're still not prioritizing life over eyesight.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's sad.
It is.
And it'd be frustrating as well for a lot of people.
It is. And it comes back to what we talked about offline, and what I'm sure we'll get into more later in this conversation, which is the mentality surrounding any type of disability is still so negative, and it's still a given that you know any sort of disability has a corresponding diminishment of quality of life, and it
Mm,
just doesn't have to be that way, either individually or collectively.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Um, Daniel, could you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced in your educational journey and how did you overcome them to achieve your goals?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, there was a 5 year gap in my K-12, and then going into college, I knew I had the intellect to survive but I didn't have much in the way of study skills. I didn't have just sort of those experiential components that go. And I had learned how to advocate on the visual side in my undergrad studies, but I wasn't as familiar with advocating for myself when it came to the invisible things, i.e., when I started to run into mental health elements, to be able to go and say, hey, I have these mental health needs that are just as valid as my visual needs, and they're not being taken care of. Or when the chronic pain, physical pain really started to kick in, again, I didn't have the tools to seek help for those things. And so it ended up taking over a decade for me to get my bachelor's degree. And um, then by the time I finally made it through that, I was, really torn. Did I want to go back for my master's in social work? Did I want to do a master's in health administration? Was I done because I just didn't feel like I had anything left in the tank? And what ended up happening is I had two different mentors who had never met each other before, still haven't met each other, come to me within 48 hours of each other and say, Daniel, I know you're trying to figure out what to do here, but you're such a strong advocate, and you're well spoken, and you're so smart, and you have all these things going for you. Why wouldn't you consider going to law school? And I told him, like, I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can afford it. I don't know that I have the mental skills. I don't know about, managing access concerns and chronic pain. And I mean, at this point too, I was not quite 2 months post-op from having my femur and hip operated on. And I didn't know it at the time, but I had pushed so hard through that leg surgery and going to try to find a job at a convention. I had actually torn the tendon in my other foot, just pushing through the pain to try to go figure out what was next at this convention. So I wasn't in a great place. I was feeling very anxious and really struggling. So this is a rather ironic time to have somebody come say, hey, I'm out of law school. And underneath it all, there was that fear of finding out I wasn't good enough. At that moment, I would rather not go for it and be secure than go for it and find out whether or not I was right about not being enough. And fortunately, over that next couple of days, I thought about it. I prayed about it. I said, no, I feel like if the door's open, I'm going to walk through it and see what happens. Yeah. And a year later, there I was in law school. And I'll tell you, starting pieces of me aside, that 3-year period in law school, there were 2 foot surgeries. There were multiple rounds of COVID. There was an inflammatory attack in my hand and wrist that was unrelenting for the 2nd and 3rd year. And oh, by the way, there were access concerns, including the fact that I went the first few weeks of my first term in law school where you're learning how to read 100 pages of text between class. Oh, by the way, most of my textbooks aren't in for the first, I don't remember, like 3 or 4 weeks of the semester. So really, all of the external things I was afraid of, they all happened. Every one of the challenges I would have pinpointed in 2017 before I got started in the process, they all happened. But it's not that those are wrong, but what I couldn't see at the moment was everything I would gain, that I would develop into a leader in that space, that I would figure out the access concerns, that I would find a way to navigate the pain and the fatigue, and that it would absolutely change the trajectory of my life because I would learn to push far past everything I had expected of myself or that others had expected of me. And somewhere, I think it was my first year of law school, I finally sat down and said, you know what? Actually, dude, you are kind of smart. And if you think about what I had done up to that point, it's not like I got into law school because somebody felt sorry for me. It's not like I graduated with my bachelor's education with honors
Mm,
because somebody felt sorry for me. But it took that long for me to finally take a breath and say, you really need to stop harboring this notion that you're not smart enough. You need to
mm.
let that go because the evidence just isn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they say that what is in the way is the way. So,
Yep.
those challenges are there for you to overcome and and prove to yourself that you can do this. What did you feel was causing you to think that way or feel that way that you weren't good enough?
A lot of it was internalized and from all of those voices that you try to say, oh well, people say this or that about me, but I'm tough and I'm resilient and they're not going to get to me.
Mm,
And really, I shook them off on the surface level, but somewhere inside, some of those things stuck. And no, we kind of keep tapping on the mentorship side of things. It was really coming to that point where, and this is still a journey, where I choose to listen to and I choose to believe the people that point me in the direction of doing more and striving for more, as opposed to those who keep trying to remind me of my human faults.
mm, mm. Yeah, totally. Wow, what a story. Um, and the challenges, and you've overcome those challenges. So can we discuss a little bit about the importance of mentorship in your journey and how it influenced your decision to pursue law school?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, there's for those two who got me to that point, and then that taught me to seek out mentors in law school who, again, they weren't mentors because they felt sorry for me. They were mentors because they saw something.
Mm,
And even as I got started with the process of getting pieces of me off the ground, having people who over the last 5 years have mentored me in leadership and in the ways of nonprofits, again, finding people who they don't sugarcoat those areas for growth, but it's always couched in the belief of you can do more, you can strive for more. Here's how, so that there's always that next rung up that I'm striving for, and then reminding me to go do the same. Because I've learned that as I've been blessed with the mentors I've been blessed with, it's important to go and do the same for somebody else, which is why I do the work I do.
mm, mm. Tell us a bit about what does tuning out the noise mean to you, and how can others apply this concept into their own lives to find their purpose?
To me, what it means is learning to learning to gravitate toward those people and those ideas and perspectives who have something enriching to bring to the table. Now, what that doesn't mean is listening to all the happy stuff. No,
Mm,
my mentors tell me things all the time that are maybe a little bit tough to swallow, but they do it in an edifying manner. So, by focusing on the people and the processes that have something to teach me, not just bring me down, not just make me feel like a superhero, but teach me, by gravitating toward that, there's less space for the other forces that would drag me down. So I think, that old wisdom of, you're the amalgamation of the five people you're closest to. There's a lot of truth to that. And so that's one of the pieces of advice I always give people is surround yourself with people who help you strive for more, who help
Mm,
lift you higher, who are ready to give you truth, but give you truth in love and kindness so that you're constantly stretching your comfort zone and your beliefs and your talents to
mm.
become more.
Yes, absolutely. You want people that will challenge you and um, push you further past your what you think you can do. Um, just like you do at a gym, right? You go and do a workout, and your coach says, "Come on, you can give me one more." Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I was listening to Ed Milet the other day, and he's written a book called One More, and he lives his life by one more. So he always goes beyond what he can, what he thinks he can do.
I love Ed Milet, and it makes me think about 2017. Um, I was still in rehab after they had literally, broken and reconstructed the femur with so that upper thigh bone with a titanium nail and screws, and had gone and reconstructed my hip. And I had by that point, by this point in the journey, I had been, I think, a week and a half without being able to move that leg independently. And I'm laying on my back in physical therapy and finally squeezing and finally lift my leg up off the mat a little bit. And I'm like, ooh, that was awesome. Yes. And then the physical therapy is like, great job. Let's do 15 more of those. And I'm like, that is the quintessential physical response or critical, physical therapy response. That is it right there in a nutshell. But that's what needed to happen for me to learn to walk again, for me to go to that convention a few weeks later, and then, finally to be able to really get back on my feet literally. So there's so many analogies there.
Mm, mm, yeah, absolutely. So Daniel, how has your lived experience informed the work you do today in advocating for accessibility and inclusion?
I feel like for me, both the highs and the lows have made me aware of the needs that are out there, and they've taught me to seek out the discrepancies in the market. They've taught me to connect with people on a much deeper level.
Mm,
Um, I look at it as, I know what I'm supposed to do as somebody who is born blind and who can go out and help people reimagine what these things mean. I'm still trying to get to that same level of acceptance with chronic pain. Um, I'll admit, sometimes it sucks to wake up and not be able to move your hands, but
mm,
all of that helps me understand both the struggles that people are going through as well as the potential that people have in front of them if we start banding together, if we start striving for more and learning how to get some of those doors opened.
yeah, absolutely. It's a collective consciousness, right? The collective,
It is.
we can achieve so much more collectively than we can individually.
Absolutely.
Mm. So Daniel, what advice would you give someone who is struggling to find their purpose in the face of adversity?
Start with your zones of genius. Start with your why, the things that make you go, the things that give you energy. Start with those things and build from there. And it's especially true if you are maybe, say, just recently diagnosed with a chronic illness, or you're in the process of transitioning into having a disability. So much of the world is bent on tearing us down. And that's whether or not you have a disability, but especially if you have a disability, so much of the world is bent on tearing us down it's hyper important to remember you've got gifts and talents. You've got a unique set of skills and perspectives that the world needs. Focus on those things, build your why from there, and then
Mm.
you're going to see a much deeper level of power that comes from that.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. And it's so important to find your why. Otherwise, you just go around circles and you don't go anywhere, right? You got to know why you're doing something and have a vision to towards a goal and go for it.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was diagnosed with this connective tissue disorder after dealing with, a lifetime of unexplained pain and unexplained random injuries, I as I surrounded myself with people who were in that same battle, I started to realize that there were people who had been nurses or lawyers or teachers or whatever who were in their 30s and dropping out of the workforce. And there had been people who were in those same positions and were still staying in the workforce. And a lot of it had to do you know, with how they were able to personally manage the balance of acknowledging the struggles that come with these things, but also saying, hey, I still want to go out and do. And for me, it boiled down to if I wanted to be working when I turned 40, I knew I needed to have something that was powerful enough that it allowed me to focus on the why, to focus on the impact I was hoping to make, even when the pain was at its is at its worst. So it had to be a purpose that was more powerful than the pain, even on a daily basis, in order to really make this work.
Mm, mm, yeah, totally. And so, Daniel, what strategies have you developed to maintain your conviction and purpose during difficult times?
I personally focus on growth,
Hmm.
even when that growth has a non-linear progression.
Hmm.
And I focus on I focus on trying to serve one person at a time at scale.
Hmm.
So I hope that one day Pieces of Me is a ubiquitous organization that we have helped millions of people. But that starts by talking with people one person at a time, hearing their struggles and helping them take that next step. And realizing that that's making an impact and helping them share that impact with others. It's really about trying to be intentional and remember that even on the roughest days, it's still a net positive.
Mm, yeah, totally. And so, how do you envision a world where everyone truly belongs? And what role does challenging stigma play in achieving this vision?
So to me, that world is where we're no longer constrained by misconceptions or by a lack of access to necessary, essential resources, and or by just the lack of opportunity to prove ourselves.
Mm,
And really, bias or stigma plays into this by just keeping those doors closed, by perpetuating that fear that, oh, if we do this, it's going to lower standards, or it's going to be too expensive, or whatever. Really, the balance of an equitable society that still values merit and achievement. What that means is You get rid of the unnecessary hurdles so that we
Mm.
can all, you know, exist on the same playing field. And then let's focus on our gifts and talents. Let's have the opportunity to prove ourselves, and let's get people positioned to succeed no matter their circumstances, no matter their background, so that everyone has the opportunity to live their full potential.
Yeah, totally, totally. Wouldn't it be an amazing world where people are able to live their potential, uh, and not be told, "Hey, you can't do this," and but really they look internally and discover what their potential is, and that's the theme of this podcast is around discover your, and unleash your full potential, and
Exactly.
yeah, and it only happens when you start and when you have a vision and you start taking steps towards it.
And you lose your fear of finding the outer limits.
Mm,
That's the key component here. I think oftentimes we're taught that we are better off stopping short because then we're guaranteed not to fail, as opposed to stretching to the outer limits, knowing that failure is an option. But really and truly, I'm trying to become more and more okay, and even okay with it, even embracing the idea. One of these days, I'm going to probably find my outer limits, but if I do, that's not a failure. Actually, it's me going out and stretching to the furthest extent of my potential, and maybe even stretching beyond my potential. And to me, there's some beauty in that, and also trying to share that same mentality with others, saying, "Hey, it's not, it's okay to get to that point where it gets really tough, because that's when the real growth happens."
yeah, isn't it interesting though that as children and as young children, we are constantly stretching ourselves, and we get to adulthood, and then all of a sudden we just relax, and we're not willing to go any further. And it's like when you go beyond your outer limits, you become limitless. You
Yep.
start to find your greatness from within and the champion within.
I think that's true too. And the question really becomes, do you want to be realistic and safe, or do you want to
Mm,
be great?
mm. And there is no safe in greatness.
No, there really
No.
isn't.
Because if you want to be great, you're going to have to be open to going through all the challenges in life. And I was sharing yesterday with in a podcast episode I did yesterday that I'm currently going through the 24th restructure in my career, and I've been through three redundancies. Yet I'm still pushing through and not giving up, and just picking myself up and just keep going.
Yep,
Yeah. And it's like that
absolutely.
song, you get knocked down, but then you get up again, and you just keep moving.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Daniel, we're at the stage where now we've got five quick fire questions that I'll ask you. You can answer them within a word or a sentence. And the first question we have is, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
Yes. By stretching as far as you can go and constantly learning. And that has
Mm,
absolutely changed over time as I have decreased my fear of failure.
mm, absolutely. Yeah. Second question, who has been your greatest inspiration and why?
You know, I lean a lot on my faith, but I think as far as humans go, I look at somebody like in the U.S. I look at people like who have been unifiers in the
Mm,
U.S. One example would be someone like Robert F. Kennedy, who brought people together and made them examine what was possible and what we ought to be doing for ourselves and for others.
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, question 3. What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
That there is a heck of a lot of awesome things to look forward to in our future.
Absolutely. and you are the creator of your future. Because if we're
Yes.
created in the image of God and God created everything, then hey, create away. And it's
Yeah.
like, don't focus on what happened in the past and live in the present moment and start creating your present moment, and that will then lead you to your future. Yeah. All right. Question 4. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Surround yourself with people who are positioned to help you take that next step, and don't listen to the people who put you down for dreaming and for striving for more.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. All right. Question 5. What is one message that you would like to share with the world?
Keep hoping, keep striving, keep looking forward to a better day tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel, if people who've been listening and watching this episode would like to get in touch with you, or that some whatever you've shared today has been insightful for them and they'd like to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that? And also, uh, how have you got any programs or courses or anything that you're running at the moment that people could get involved in?
Yeah, I'm in the process of putting out some courses with a colleague on different types of accessibility and different coaching programs as well. So everything from digital to physical to cultural, and even looking at how we hire. We don't call it inclusive hiring; we call it hiring for champions. So those are
Mm,
4 different courses we're working on, as well as other coaching programs. Please, by all means, feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn as Daniel Hodges JD, and that JD stands for Juris Doctorate, so it's a signifier of having graduated law school.
mhm.
And also, I would encourage people to check out piecesofme.org, and that's PEACES of me.org. And you can remember that spelling by me saying that the spelling signifies that we are not broken, and that peace comes by embracing who we are and who we're meant to be, and also that we are an advocacy organization meant to really bring people back together for the common good and to strive for something better.
Mm, I love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. So if you've been listening to this podcast episode or watching it, there you go. Connect with Daniel on piecesofme.org. That's PEACES of me.org. And I believe you're also on Facebook as well.
Correct.
Right. And if this has been an insightful podcast episode for you, or you've really enjoyed this, I encourage you to share this on your social media, share this with your family, your friends, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast so we can get that out to the wider world and we can make a difference. And I'd like to encourage you to champion your life and champion your greatness. And also remember, you are worthy and you are loved. Thank you for joining us today. Have an amazing day.